the ultimate purpose to scrutinise and revise legislation is delivered day in and day out in a very effective fashion, appreciated on the majority of occasions by the House of Commons, and as we have heard, delivering better legislation for the benefit of all of our fellow citizens. Mr. President, I too would like to join others who have spoken in this debate and thank you very much for the kind invitation to me personally to attend this evening. It's a very special evening for me because I attended some 40 years ago an interview here at Oxford in the attempt to read medicine and spent the entire interview talking about my determination and ambition to join this fine society and to one day serve as its president. Regrettably, those taking the interview felt that it would be a wasted opportunity to offer somebody a place to read medicine with such a determination to serve in this union. But I'm finally here and very pleased to be so. Thank you very much indeed. I've listened with great interest to the two marvellous speeches made by those proposing this motion. And I have to say that in some elements, there is merit in what has been said. But there is a fundamental lack of understanding about the complexity, the disposition of the constitutional arrangements that represent our Parliament. And I think fundamentally, the reason why the House of Lords is fit for purpose is because it does not impeach, it does not embarrass, it does not impede in any way the primacy of the House of Commons. And this is the fundamental question that needs to be addressed. I think we would all agree that Parliament must be sovereign. There are so many elements of our constitutional settlement, important elements of the state, that have no democratic legitimacy. The judges, for instance, our civil service, our local government officials, but they all play a vitally important role that we respect. We are fortunate to live in a country, in a democracy, where there is absolute clarity. The House of Commons enjoys primacy in a sovereign parliament. To reform a second chamber or to give it in any way the opportunity to challenge that primacy is folly. Now, one, I think, needs to look more broadly at the question of fitness for purpose in terms of the overall delivery and function of Parliament. And I would argue, but Sir Vince is better positioned to address this matter, that it is the House of Commons that finds itself in a less effective place than it once used to be. And that is because progressively, over a number of decades, the capacity for members of the House of Commons, the representatives, the clear representatives of our fellow citizens sent to Parliament to exercise their judgment on the behalf of fellow citizens is continuously undermined and diminished through the capacity of the House authorities, the executive, to use programme motions, to use guillotine motions and so on, to reduce the capacity of that House to undertake scrutiny and to challenge the executive. And so the attention has turned more in recent years, and certainly in the 14 years that I've had the privilege to sit in the House of Lords, with an expectation that the Lords should now challenge the government. That is not the purpose of our second chamber. The purpose of the House of Lords is simply scrutiny and to propose revision of legislation and to ask the other place, the House of Commons, to think again. And it is for that chamber to think again and to reflect upon amendments and views expressed in the House of Lords, and on the majority of occasions, when amendments are sent from the Lords to the Commons to ask that place to think again, they are accepted. On few occasions, there is contention and repeated ping-pong between the two houses. So I would say that as a general rule, the constitutional settlement works very well. Now, the gentleman from University College gave a marvellous speech, but I sensed that he felt the House of Lords is an affront to democracy. And if indeed that is the view, and there are many people who believe it is, then one has to ask what the solution to that affront to democracy is. And it must be a truly democratic solution. And that truly democratic solution will result inevitably in a second chamber with a democratic mandate and a legitimacy to frankly challenge the authority of the House of Commons. And if that is the situation in which we settle, then there will be gridlock and our parliamentary democracy will be severely undermined. Now, other proposals are frequently debated. One is that we move from a bicameral to a unicameral parliament. But ultimately, that will strengthen the position of the executive. And if anything, modern British politics has taught us that the executive needs to be challenged effectively. And that challenge has to come from not only the capacity of the Lords in a distinctive fashion from the House of Commons to look at legislation and propose amendment, but it needs to come from a strong and functioning House of Commons that itself is not restricted in its ability to challenge the executive. Now, what I did find fascinating were the arguments around how the Lords may be appointed, that it is in some way offensive that members are appointed for life. It will not, of course, come as a surprise that I am one of those life-appointed members. And I came through a system, the House of Lords Appointments Commission, established in 2000 by Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister, as a consequence of his House of Lords Reform Act. But interestingly, established in a way which I do accept needs further review and consideration, established not on a statutory basis, but merely through the laying of a written ministerial statement in the House of Commons, establishing the House of Lords Appointments Commission as an advisory committee to the Prime Minister. And its function, I had the privilege of chairing the House of Lords Appointments Commission for 5 years after I arrived in the House. And I came to realise that its powers are limited because Prime Ministers enjoy the power of patronage. But there is a way, a very simple way, of correcting that, and that is to put the House of Lords Appointments Commission on a statutory basis, using the same criteria that we use today to make judgments on the appointment of crossbench peers, both in terms of individual propriety and in terms of suitability, for all nominations, be they independent nominations to the crossbenches or to the party political benches, nominations made by the party leaders and the prime ministers. And that would give greater confidence in the appointments process, but it would still result in an appointed second chamber, lacking ultimately the legitimacy in democratic terms to challenge the primacy of the House of Commons and to ensure that we had and continue to have a functioning parliament. Now, if we go down a different route and we have a chamber with a degree or exclusive democratic legitimacy as our second chamber, then there will be a need to define in a codified constitution the powers of the two chambers. And once we have that codified constitution, something we don't have at the moment, then ultimately there will be something above Parliament that will have the power to determine what happens in Parliament and how powers are exercised. And that will be a constitutional court, a Supreme Court functioning as a constitutional court, which is not the current purpose of our Supreme Court, and therefore ultimately we start on a path where we erode the sovereignty of Parliament. And when we talk about the sovereignty of Parliament, we actually talk about the sovereignty of the people. Because our settlement is simple. The people, at the time of an election, send their representatives to the House of Commons. For a party leader to become Prime Minister and form a government, they must enjoy the confidence of that House of Commons. There is absolute clarity. We must therefore not undermine the simplicity of that understanding. I accept that there may be need to change the way that things are currently done in the House of Lords, but not major changes. The ultimate purpose, to scrutinise and revise legislation, is delivered day in and day out in a very effective fashion, appreciated on the majority of occasions by the House of Commons, and as we have heard, delivering better legislation for the benefit of all of our fellow citizens.